Welcome to Tipping Points, episode 37, Age-Old Ways Incorporating Indigenous Knowledge Systems into Environmental Sustainability. Tipping Points is the webinar where we ask questions about how to preserve biodiversity while balancing conservation and development. This webinar series is an initiative of the Oppenheimer Generations Research and Conservation. Webinars usually take place on the last Thursday of the month at 1 p.m. My name is Jacob Mapara, as already indicated, and I'm the director of the Institute of Lifelong Learning and Development Studies at Chinhoyi University of Technology in Zimbabwe. I will be facilitating this episode of Turning Points. I'm so excited to be with you here with you today because we are going to discuss the very important topic of how best to ensure that we integrate the local voices and indigenous knowledge systems into science and conservation projects in Africa. We are going to hear from three distinguished academics with very different backgrounds on how they've approached working with local groups in their own projects. They are also going to share some best practice insights with us. We are excited to hear the presentation of we are excited to hear the presentation each one is presented, as well as their responses to some of your questions. To this end, there is a question and answer function in the webinar. Please don't hesitate to drop your questions there at any time, and we will do our best to answer as many as possible during the session. Before we meet the panelists, I just want to ensure everyone is aware that this session is being recorded and will be available on the Oppenheimer Generations Research and Conservation YouTube channel. This is also where you can catch up on any past webinars you have missed. I encourage you to sign up for the OGRC quarterly newsletter and stay tuned to OGR's social media channel so you don't miss upcoming webinars and announcements. We are very pleased that each of you chose to spend time with us today. Please continue to introduce yourself and engage in the chat box. So now I am pleased to introduce to you our three panelists. We have Dr. Zoe Jewell, a conservation biologist and co-founder of the Footprint Identification NPO Wild Track. We also have Dr. Olga Kupika, Senior Research Fellow in Climate Change Adaptation at the Okavango Research Institute, University of Botswana. We have Mr. Herbert Bikela, founder of the Center for Cultural Development Initiative, part of the Gaza Trust Zimbabwe, and a Tsonga language expert. How things are going to work today: each panelist will have an opportunity to present for 5 minutes to talk about their response to the topic. Then we will dig a little deeper with a few questions to help us understand the nuances of these complicated issues. Finally, we will open the floor to you, the audience, to share some comments and questions. We will wrap at 2 p.m. First up is Dr. Zoe Jewell, a conservation biologist and the co-founder of Wild Track, a non-profit dedicated to non-invasive wildlife monitoring using footprint identification and technology. With a background in medical parasitology from London University, as well as veterinary medicine from Cambridge University, she has published on wildlife conservation widely in both academic and data-driven tracking methods. An adjunct associate professor at Duke University, she collaborates with global researchers and indigenous trackers to develop non-invasive monitoring methods to provide real-time landscape scale data to inform conservation strategies. Her work integrates AI, statistics, ethics, and traditional ecological knowledge to improve wildlife monitoring and promote sustainable conservation efforts worldwide. Dr. Jewell, over to you.
So thank you very much for inviting me. I'm honoured to be here. I'd like to thank OGRC and the Tipping Point series, and of course Jive Media for putting it together. I'm excited to hear what everybody has to say on this topic. I'm a conservation biologist primarily, and I work with my partner Skylar by a non-profit called Wild Track. And our work in conservation is a little unusual, I guess, because our focus is primarily on bringing together traditional ecological knowledge for the benefit of science and for the benefit of those people who hold the traditional ecological knowledge. And I'll tell you a few stories along the way quickly while I show these slides about why we've started doing this, why we veered away from standard sort of Western science for the benefit of environmental sustainability. So our story goes back a few decades, I'm afraid to say, when we started working in Zimbabwe for the Zimbabwean government, specifically to monitor black rhino. And we used all the traditional approaches, telemetry, putting collars on the animals. That was standard practice at the time. And to cut a very long story short, over the process of 10 years monitoring these animals, we found that not only were the collars failing regularly, rhinos are not really adapted to sort of fit collars, their heads are sort of bullet shaped and the collars come off and they rub them against trees, but more importantly, there were fertility issues, animals that were being regularly immobilized to repeat collar were having fewer calves, and this seemed to be going directly against what we'd been trying to do, which was protect them. So we started thinking rather differently, and what led us to think differently was that every day when we went out into the field with local trackers and scouts, they were looking at the ground instead of trying to find the rhinos by waving a telemetry device around in the air. They were saying, all you need to do is look at the ground. And to be honest, in the beginning, we were skeptical. We thought, well, this can't be science. This doesn't sound very scientific. But the more we worked with these expert trackers, the more we understood about how much they were picking up from the environment. And you can see in this image one of our scouts on the left pointing out a sign left by a rhino, a scrape, a sort of communal midden. And on the right-hand side, there's a rhino footprint. And that, to somebody who's not used to looking at footprints, is just, a smudge in the ground. But an expert tracker can pick up the most amazing amount of detail from a footprint. So we started thinking, well, perhaps there's some way that we, as sort of traditional scientists, can actually learn something from this towards being able to know where these animals are, who they're moving around with, all the key questions that conservationists need to know. Footprints are very complicated things. They are signals from nature. They're complex signals, and trackers are uniquely positioned to be able to identify all sorts of elements of these signals. And I'll say right from the outset that our technology that we've developed from footprints is really just tapping into a tiny microcosm of what trackers can actually see. So we still have a lot to learn. But just looking at this slide, you can see there are many different shapes of footprints. The substrate colors are different. The lighting conditions are different. This here is a tiny small mammal footprint, a mouse footprint. And they're so tiny that we have to capture those on paper with ink, with the animal running over sticky paper. We can't even find them on the ground. So there's so much to learn in footprints. Every time an animal puts its foot down, you get a different impression. So it's a very complex science, and it's something that we really have only learned from traditional ecological knowledge sources. So over the years, building up this approach of looking at footprints, we've begun to be able to tease apart, to decode footprints using elements of traditional science. And if you can see here in the top window, there's a footprint on the computer, an image that we brought into the computer in a program called JUMP. We work very closely with JUMP software. It's data visualization. And that has enabled us to be able to identify species, individuals, sex, their age, just from their footprints. And on the right side here, you can see we've started to use machine learning to do this, artificial intelligence. And we're getting pretty good results. The trackers are still getting better results. And the trackers can do very much more. So I would say, as far as our progress is concerned, this is great news that we've got this footprint identification technology, but we still have a lot more to learn from trackers. And really, what we're trying to do now is build a bridge or many bridges from people who've got that traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous knowledge, to help us understand some of the elements they're using to get better classification of animals, better knowledge about where they're roaming. And these pictures show some of the groups that we've been working with in South Africa. This image in the bottom left was one of the workshops that we held in South Africa. And this group I love this group because it shows local ecologists, it shows expert trackers, it shows our colleague Nico at the back there, who I think is listening in today, who's an expert small mammalogist. It shows friends from OGRC. It shows aerospace engineers from the Botswana Defence Force who are learning tracking, local parks officials, a whole range of people coming together, brought together by this indigenous knowledge and the translation into science, which I think is very exciting. And in this picture, you can see an expert tracker from Eco Training, the guy kneeling. Eco Training is another of our partners in South Africa, showing a group of non-trackers some of the elements that he's seeing on the ground from these tracks and these footprints. And then at the bottom here, this is Sky, who's my partner at Wild Track, who actually was born and raised in Africa, showing a group of high schoolers, local high schoolers in South Africa, how we collect tracks from small mammals. And it was fascinating to us how engaged these kids were. They were just amazing, really, really excited about the process. So I think there's something about seeing tracks on the ground that really brings you into nature, where Western science tends to be very reductionist and trying to pick out individual elements. Traditional ecological knowledge is much more holistic. It's bringing together different science to form a conclusion. And when we say indigenous knowledge to science, we're really talking about one type of science to another type of science, because tracking is a science that was really the kind of driving force of human evolution. Without being able to track, our ancestors couldn't survive. They were going to not be able to eat, or they were going to be eaten by something else. So there was a very strong evolutionary pressure to become good at tracking, to become good at pattern identification. Which is why we can learn so much from this indigenous knowledge, both in terms of conservation and cognitive science, which in turn feeds into better machine learning. And from indigenous trackers, there are also many other people around the world who are coming to learn about tracking, who want to learn about tracking. This is our Wild Track Specialist Group, a group of conservation biologists specifically all over the world, who are working with indigenous trackers to try and improve how we monitor endangered species. And I love to see these two groups come together. We learn so much from each other when we get together at conferences and workshops, and people bounce ideas off each other. It's fascinating. And so the kind of outcome of all this is, well, we're collecting tracks now from all over the world, footprints in many of the projects we're working with. We're working with indigenous groups, and we're starting to build up maps of footprints from different species around the world. And our vision is to see this whole map covered in spots. This is just a small subsection of some of our data, but we want this whole map to be covered in data points from endangered species, so that we'll be able to see where they're going, how they're using their habitat, where they most need our help, where they're at most risk. And the wonderful thing really about it is that it can be applied to so many conservation fields. So many of the applications we work with are to do with data-driven scientific conservation strategies. Where are animals going? How are they using their habitats? We're doing a lot of work in South Africa with black rhino, with anti-poaching. There are lots of areas where this data helps us understand how to mitigate human-wildlife conflict. So there's so much data in a footprint that can be translated across different conservation challenges, and all of these feed into ecological integrity, ecological sustainability, because biodiversity is really the kind of bedrock of everything that we take from the environment. And so understanding how to protect it is key to that. And so the way that we collect data is basically by engaging communities around the world to collect footprints for us. And we have a little app, a Wild Track app, which is free to use on Google or iOS. And we have communities all over the world now using this app to collect footprints. Sometimes they're experts in traditional ecological knowledge. Sometimes they're kids in the US going on a hike, a class hike, and they're taking their phones along with them. But the beauty of this is really that you have a whole community coming together to contribute data for conservation. Collecting footprints is free. They're ubiquitous. They're everywhere, all over the globe. And wherever an animal walks, it'll leave footprints. So sometimes it's very, very difficult to see some of these endangered species. They're elusive. Most of them are nocturnal, but they leave footprints. So footprints are those clues that we can use to actually find them. So I'd like to stop there. I think that's enough. But to thank everyone and to say that we're very excited to be able to kind of take this forward with people who've got this expert knowledge in South Africa, Southern Africa, not only to bring their knowledge for the benefit of ecological sustainability for all of us, but to educate scientists, I think, to say, look, there's so much value in this traditional ecological knowledge if we can only embrace it and talk to people, understand how it works. So thank you very much, and I think I'll hand over now.
Thank you, Dr. Jewell. And to our audience, if you have some questions for Dr. Jewell, you are welcome to add them to the question and answer tab, and Dr. Jewell can respond in the meantime. We will also have an opportunity for more questions after all the panelists have presented. So after here, we have Dr. Olga Kupika, a senior research fellow in climate change adaptation at Okavango Research Station Institute, University of Botswana. Dr. Kupika is also an associate professor in natural resources management, a UNFCCC registered climate change expert, and a volunteer expert with UNESCO Earth Network. She is a task-oriented and results-focused conservationist with over a decade of experience in research, teaching, community service, and professional engagement in higher and tertiary education. Her research skills and competences include climate change adaptation, indigenous knowledge systems, community-based natural resource management, biodiversity conservation and sustainable development, tangible and intangible cultural heritage preservation, disaster risk management, and agroecology. Dr. Kupika, the floor is yours. Over to you.
I'll just put this on this sharing mode. Thank you very much, colleagues, for joining. Greetings of the day, everyone. And thank you for joining us on this series where I'm going to share my experiences with regards to this topical and important issue in our day-to-day life, which is key in terms of ensuring that we manage our environment without compromising our surroundings, in particular the biodiversity which surrounds us and which is key to sustaining our livelihoods. So this is the outline of my presentation. So basically what I'm going to share, somehow it also intersects with what the previous speaker, Zoe, has said, in the sense that we are all focusing on harnessing IKS for environmental sustainability. So looking at environmental sustainability, this is a multifaceted concept which basically tries to look at the interlinkages between people, places, and planet. And I'm happy to share that if you look at my work over the past years, my work has been focusing on how we can commit ourselves to promoting indigenous knowledge systems. And these systems are built on our experiences, how we interact with nature, and our practices, our culture, our language is key in terms of understanding how we interact with biodiversity. So I'm also privileged to share that when you look at the Oppenheimer Creed, which is actually committed, I will quote, the creed states that we are committed to living our world better than how we found it and to building sustainable and prosperous societies. We will do this through focused engagement across the land, people, and cultures we touch. I'm also privileged to be a recipient of funding, which is also focusing on how we can actually tap into indigenous knowledge. And this resonates with the Oppenheimer Creed. In trying to make sure that we tap into IKS, we have got people who live adjacent to Shangani Holistic. And when we look at the mandate of holistic management, basically it is centered around how do we balance social responsibility, environmental, and financial sustainability. All these are key principles which underlie holistic management. So within holistically managed environments, we also have this rich knowledge which we can derive from within and from adjacent environments, which can actually promote this situation whereby we realize core benefits in terms of stewardship. So for not only for the environment, but for sustainability. So in terms of what I've experienced so far as a researcher, over the past years, my research from my postmasters, my doctorate studies, my postdoctoral studies, and my current studies as a senior researcher, I've actually had an opportunity to interface with communities who hold this rich knowledge, which is normally ignored or dismissed somehow. But I'm challenging you today, that knowledge which you have dismissed or ignored, rethink in terms of how you can reframe that knowledge so that you can apply it in your day-to-day lives so that we can actually solve environmental challenges, including climate change, which is here with us. So with this opportunity, at the moment, we have a project which is running, which is funded under the Oppenheimer Generations Research and Conservation, which is named the Shangani Holistic Climate Change and Ecosystem Services Project. So in this project, we are privileged to work with knowledge holders from the surrounding community so that we can combine that rich knowledge with scientific knowledge to assess the impacts of climate change on ecosystem services. And here we have an example of a project, and this project also includes youth. What I like about the project is we are also leveraging on the intergenerational situation on the ground where we have different generations cutting across, how our youth who are also doing research, we've got interns, but they can also get that opportunity to share and get knowledge from the surrounding communities in terms of how they have experienced the changing climate, What solutions are in place in terms of the nature-based solutions? So IKS is key in terms of providing as such. We also have got topical issues like the carbon markets as part of our wildlife economy, because the economy part is key in terms of holistic management, because financial sustainability is also important. How then can we also tap into this knowledge from the age-old ways? How can we tap into IKS so that we can identify key species and key areas which we can leverage on in terms of promoting the carbon markets? So this is one of the areas which you are also focusing on in trying to utilize when we utilize IKS and scientific knowledge. Again, human communities since time immemorial have got a close relationship with plant species around them, be it trees, shrubs, or herbaceous plants. Because in Shangaan Holistic, we have livestock, we have wildlife. All these are key. They are sustained by the plant resources within the park. We have challenges which are also emerging as a result of the changing climate, particularly drought. So with drought affecting our wildlife and our livestock, not only within the park or within the range, but outside the range, how can we harness indigenous knowledge on plant species, which we can also call ethnobotanical knowledge, ethnomedicinal knowledge, or ethnoveterinary knowledge, so that we can identify plant species of interest with potential for bioprospecting, so that we can come up with ways of treating or managing livestock, wildlife, as well as providing for human communities, because they're also into livestock production. So it is also key that IKS can actually promote livestock and human health for climate resilience, not only within the holistically managed environment, but for the benefit of the adjacent rural communities. So again, looking at other experiences from across borders, because we live within the region and climate change knows no boundaries, I've also had an opportunity to work together with other experts so that we can harness IKS towards safeguarding the living heritage and enforcing site conservation and biodiversity within the Asante traditional buildings premises in Ghana. And this was a practical experience where we interfaced with indigenous knowledge holders, our traditional leaders, how they've also lived these experiences, the changes they've noticed, and how we can actually be able to sustain and restore biodiversity based on the knowledge from their encounters. So biodiversity conservation goals can be achieved as we tap into IKS, trying to identify what is it that we have and how can we use it to promote resilience among communities who are vulnerable to different extreme conditions, be it flooding or be it drought or even heat waves. So what is it that we gain from all this work? So as a researcher, apart from interfacing with the knowledge holders, I also package this knowledge into publications which can also be shared. So we've got different audience, different readers can access this knowledge. But what is important is, what are the kind of interventions which are necessary to ensure that we come up with solutions, community-based solutions, which are also key in terms of sustaining our resilience amid this changing climate. So I'll leave you with this key message. As you interact with your environment, how are you tapping into IKS to try and harness any knowledge which you have had but have dismissed because perhaps you are a climate scientist, or perhaps you are into climate modeling, or perhaps you are an expert in remote sensing? but you feel IKS may not be key, try to rethink how you can tap into IKS in terms of making sure that it guides your climate change prediction, perhaps, and also coming up with solutions, because understanding what has been happening in the past and also linking that into the future is key in terms of promoting resilience. So with these few words, I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Kupika. Looks like the line that is running through your presentation and that of Zoe is the issue of sustainability, the issue of indigenous knowledge. I think something came into my mind on the what appears to be a recent awakening, and a Shona statement came into my mind where people say vana vembwa vasvini ruzuva rimwe. And when puppies are born, they do not all open their eyes on the same day. So the whole thing is life is a learning journey. We are continuously learning, and the best way of learning is to learn from one another. So while we are still at it, to our dear audiences, we say if you have some questions for Dr. Kupika, please add them to the question and answer tab, and Dr. Kupika can respond in the meantime. We will also have an opportunity for more questions after all the panelists have presented. Now, finally, but not least, we have Mr. Herbert Pikela, who is the founder of the Center for Cultural Development Initiatives, which falls under the Gaza Trust Zimbabwe, an organization that specializes in the development of grassroots community cultural initiatives. He is a holder of a master's degree in socio-ecological systems and development practice from the University of Zimbabwe. And his areas of expertise include indigenous knowledge systems and sustainable development, education and culture, and policy and rights awareness. He is also a Tsonga language expert and author, an activist, a specialist, and he sits on the board of the National Arts Council of Zimbabwe. Mr. Pikela, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Prof. and Prof. Kupika and Zoe for the presentations. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to share my insights from a conservation perspective, since I'm working within the Gonarejo landscape in the Great Limpopo Transplanter Conservation Area in Zimbabwe. So yes, I'm Herbert Pikela. I'm a community member, and I'm going to share my citizen science in terms of our community work we are doing in Gonarejo landscape. Let me start by saying that Gonarejo National Park, when it was established, it didn't involve communities neighboring the park in the conservation work within Gonarejo. And in trying to address the challenges the park was facing in terms of human and wildlife conflict, in terms of poaching, it was quite difficult to manage human and wildlife conflict until in 2018, the Gonarejo Conservation Trust realized that for conservation to be successful in Gonarejo National Park, we need to involve the communities neighboring the park, which are the communities that have sustained wildlife until Gonarejo was designated as a national park. Therefore, Gonarejo considered the community as a key pillar in conservation and brought within conservation programming the community perspective. So I'm going to share with you the key insights from that particular approach, where the local knowledge, the ecological, traditional ecological knowledge, is integrated in conservation programming. So from the community engagement program, we brought the community to the table to discuss the key issues affecting both the park and the community, and collectively find ways of addressing those issues. So the community brought to the table their vast knowledge in terms of sustainable use of natural resources, in terms of managing human-wildlife conflict. And as Korekore Conservation Trust, we also help the community in documenting places of cultural significance in the park. So what did we get from this kind of relationship? We realized that communities have got their own ways of managing natural resources. They've got their own systems of utilizing sustainably the natural resources within and without the national park. And what we got is that locally and periodically, communities always created a problem with the park whenever Bangala, a wild vegetable, is ripe in the park and they would like to access that particular resource. And at the end, they were arrested for accessing that particular resource illegally, because that resource is very crucial or important to their local diet. Hence, we came up with a community resource sharing program to allow the community to and legal manner, and that has helped to ease community park relations and address poaching, especially in the northern side of the park, the Mahenya area. And we are collectively working with the community to harvest it sustainably. So, never mind the background, I'm in a park, so those are the baboons. So what I was saying is that we realized also that the community have got some, sustainable way of conserving natural resources, especially when it comes to their use. So the Saila fish harvesting program, which we are also encouraging as the park, that's the traditional way of sustainably harvesting the fish. And this particular system is presided over by the traditional leaders who, upon ecological assessment of the fish resources in the rivers, in the pools, would set a day for the harvest of this particular resource in a sustainable way using the Saila reeds. And, this system only harvests or targets the big fish, and it allows the small fish to pass through so that in the next year we'll have a resource to harvest. And this fish is harvested collectively by the community, and it is shared with all the members of the community, starting with the vulnerable members of the community. And we have realized as Korekore that this is the most sustainable way of harvesting fish. And we are also promoting this way of managing natural resources and the environment. And related to that, through our documentation of the places of cultural significance, we realized that in the park, the community around Chief Gezan in the southern side of Korekore, they practiced handing management, the quotas at Manyandapan, where the chief would meet with his team to discuss or to set, handing quotas, how many impala are we going to hand this year, especially targeting the male ones. And then handing was a collective way, was collectively implemented, and the 100 game was shared between the chief and his subjects. We feel that this is related to what is being practiced in safari hunting, what is being practiced in, trophy hunting, on campfire and the like. But this rooted in the indigenous cultures of the communities neighboring the Korekore National Park. And then one key issue is human and wildlife conflict management. We have realized that the communities neighboring the park, in as much as they face key costs in terms of managing human-wildlife conflict or bearing the impacts of the conflicts, they have devised their own indigenous ways of managing the conflict. Sometimes they understand the migration or the movement of elephants, and their fields were strategically
Mr.
positioned.
Pikela, if you could wind up.
Okay.
Yes.
I was talking about the role of the indigenous knowledge in human-wildlife conflict and the techniques they are using to manage human-wildlife conflict. And lastly, is a key example in how indigenous knowledge is integrated in the economic development of the park. We've realized that the Korekore National Park, in terms of their tourism products, they have set aside the indigenous, the Mananga camps, which has adopted the Shangan artisan designs to give a blend, tourism products with a blend of traditional culture and modern comfort. So I can go on and on in terms of sharing some key insights in where the indigenous knowledge has been harnessed in the sustainable conservation of wildlife and biodiversity in Korekore. Let me rest my case. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pikela. Thank you all for sharing the insights. Now we get into this topic with a few questions. Maybe we'll be looking at a question from each panelist. I will be asking some questions. I hope you can all hear me. To Olga, our first question, of course, maybe the first one would be a comment and an observation that I've made when you are presenting from a research perspective, a phenomenological research perspective. I do realize that Olga and Herbert are speaking from an emic perspective. These are insiders who they are both insiders and cum researchers, while Zoe is an outsider who is learning. And what I would want to know from all of you is, how do you deal with the biases of the baggage that you are bringing along with you as you engage in this issue of the deployment of indigenous knowledge in conservation? Because we cannot deny the fact that there is this bias. Everyone possibly believes their science is the best science. How do you deal with that baggage? How do you manage to mitigate that challenge? This question is for all of you. I hope you can either verbally respond to it or you can respond in the chat box. Then, of course, to Olga, maybe the question is, how do we integrate indigenous knowledge into scientific conservation research and management plans, as well as the practices related? And of course, how involved are the youths in IKS, and does it resonate with them?
Very much, Herbert, and thank you, colleagues, for those questions. Let me start with the question on how do we avoid bias in our engagement with communities since we are insiders. I think bias may be inevitable, but at the same time, bias, you can also use that as an entry point to make sure that you overcome the challenges which we face in terms of incorporating IKS. So what is key is that when you're doing research, as a researcher in climate change adaptation, for example, from the onset during the research cycle, as you identify the challenges which communities are facing and how you can also come up with solutions, you create a platform where all knowledge systems actually come together, a platform where you bring together all stakeholders. It should be a multi-stakeholder platform which leverage on the multidisciplinary nature. So IKS can cut across all disciplines. So the key is, are we engaging all the knowledge holders, respecting their voice and tapping into their voice to come up with a concrete decision in terms of how do these knowledge systems complement each other? So like I said, it's a matter of accommodating each other. How do you accommodate and tolerate those knowledge systems which you feel are of no value? And through that engagement, you begin to understand, realize that every knowledge is important and every voice is important until we co-create that solution which we want. So it should be evidence-based. If it is science, how do we repackage that science so that it has got meaning, not only in terms of the solution which is going to proffer, but also in terms of whether it is addressing community needs. Is it community-driven as well? So that's the only way we can also avoid bias, but at the same time, making sure that we are all co-creators of solutions in terms of the environmental challenges we face. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Mr. Pikela, if you could be brief. Time is not on our side.
Yeah, what I want to, address the issue of bias, we need to be driven by the challenge we are addressing, the key issue we are working on, and then we need to collectively agree in terms of the key indicators we are tracking. And like Prof. Olga said, everything needs to be, evidence-based, and monitoring and evaluation at any particular aspect will be necessary or key to guide us scientifically. Whenever we are using indigenous knowledge, we need also to be, pin it some evidence so that it is independent, it is scientific in whatever way.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Zoe.
Thank you, Jacob. I think I would agree with everything that Olga and Herbert have said, and we've had similar experiences in the sense that bringing disparate groups together to talk about their differences and their different interpretations is like the first step. We have experienced interesting challenges, I think, because whilst the tracker groups that we work with, people with Indigenous expert knowledge, seem to be very accepting of science, the opposite is not always true. And we've had a struggle getting people trained in Western science, that includes me, to understand the value of Indigenous expert knowledge. And because this knowledge is so kind of holistic and integrative, it's something that we really have a hard time replicating in Western science. So whilst we want to, just prove that it works using science, science is often not capable of picking up all the elements that traditional ecological knowledge uses. So this is why we think it's so important to build these bridges and to bring in experts from all these fields to try and see, okay, what are the common elements? Perhaps there aren't common elements, but we can still make these things work together for the benefit of everybody. But I think the bottom line is discussion, and trying to find those common elements to move forward to get the best of all worlds.
Okay, thank you. I think due to time constraints, to our panelists, I say you can type responses to the questions that have been asked by our audiences, so that at least they get something and it would be helpful as we move into the future. Yeah, and I would like to thank you all for your valuable contributions to this discussion. We do hope the next sessions would be as enriching and as insightful. So I would like to thank Zoe, Olga, and Herbert for your invaluable inputs and significant contributions to this. The next OGRC Tipping Points webinar will be in the new year, so please keep an eye open on our social on social pages, where we will soon advertise the date and the topic. Please also consider signing up for our quarterly newsletter to stay updated on future events, including future Tipping Points webinars. You can find the sign up in the chat box. For those who missed any part of this webinar or wish to revisit it, a recording will be uploaded to the Open HEMA Generations Research and Conservation YouTube channel. Additionally, a summary of this webinar will also be available on the OGRC website. Once again, thank you all for your participation, and we look forward to welcoming you in the next Tipping Points webinar in the new year. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.